Hi everyone, Kartik Krishnaiyer here for Beyond the 90. And I wanted to spend a little time today talking about the North American Soccer League in 2012. For several years, I was the director of communications and public relations for the league, and I wanted to walk through our 2012 media guide today. Now, why I picked 2012 instead of 2011, which was our first season playing, and 2010 when we had a hybrid league with USL, which was called the USSL Division Two Pro League, was because this was the first league the first year we had full sanctioning. We were provisionally sanctioned in 2011. 2010, there was the hybrid league, although I do want to do some videos and some retrospectives on 2010 and 2011 in the near future. And this is really kind of the year we found our feet. These guys, San Antonio Scorpions, were our best team in the regular season that year. They were an expansion team. They also had incredible attendance, and that momentum for professional soccer in South Texas has continued since then. And it was ironic. They came in 2012. Obviously, Austin had a Division II team in USL in 2009, and then in the D2 League in 2010 that moved to Orlando, owned by Phil Rollins, and became Orlando City, and then went to MLS. And now Austin has an MLS team as well. But San Antonio was our standout side in the regular season that year. They were also incredibly well supported locally. And maybe some of you who are watching this video are Crocketeers or were Scorpions fans in 2012. So here's our media guide from 2012. On the cover, Minnesota, who had won the final against Fort Lauderdale in 2011. Minnesota was a league-owned team at this point. They would be bought toward the end of the season, or right after the end of the season, by Dr. Bill McGuire, rebranded Minnesota United. They too are now in MLS. So when we look inside, we have our vision, some pictures. Carolina Railhawks, who are now North Carolina FC in USL, were our best team in 2011, even though they lost in the playoffs. Here was our commissioner, David Downs, who had also been the executive director of the U.S.'s bid committee. World Cup bid committee for 2018 and 2022. It was such a pleasure to work for this man. Really a great man, a great soccer mind, and it come from the broadcast media industry. This was our staff. That's me, obviously. Darren McCartney, good friend of mine, worked together with him again at Miami FC many years later. And then others, Rishi Sehgal became the interim commissioner of NASL. Its final season, I think, maybe would have been the full commissioner had the league continued. We'll get into all of that in some other time. Jessica Barrera was our executive assistant. Derek Reese, someone I've worked with really closely. NASL, Fort Lauderdale Strikers, continue to him or she FC continue to work with him on projects today. Also at World Soccer Talk, work with him. So we go through our competition formatting here and how clubs qualify for the playoffs, our match ball, and our trophies. Now, the Soccer Bowl was won by the Tampa Bay Rowdies that year. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And then the regular season championship, as I mentioned, was won by San Antonio. And we had the famous stars on the ball, which everybody loved. We had a couple changes in the league. Montreal had moved to MLS. Minnesota had changed their crest. They were still the Minnesota Stars at that point. San Antonio had joined the league, although they had joined the league in late 2010, but were playing. And that here, this was over a copyright dispute. The Rowdies were able to finally call themselves the Rowdies. They had been going by FC Tampa Bay with the Rowdies as a nickname prior to that due to a copyright dispute with Classic Sports, Inc. Atlanta Silverbacks, coached by Eric Winalda for the second half of this season. Let's see who of significance people might know on this team. Rafael Cox, obviously had been an MLS player. Matt Horth was a really good player, would be a future MLS player. Martin Lancaster was their captain. Kieran O'Brien had been a pretty good player for a while with Colorado. Lucas Paulini, another really good player. at the NASL level. Silverbacks were poor until Ronaldo took them over. Carolina Railhawks, one of our standout clubs always. The Railhawks, standout players that year, they had lost Etienne Barbara, who had been the league MVP the previous year. He had moved to Vancouver of MLS. Let's see. Brian Shriver, Tisha Polani, Sam Stockley. These are all standout players. Nick Zimmerman, who was from here in Florida, as was Brian Shriver. Brian Shriver is from Clearwater. Nick Zimmerman from Tampa. Gale Abusamande was a standout player for them. Akira Fitzgerald, Capano Lowe, Amir Lowry. These are all standouts. Chris Nurse, very good team. I know I'm leaving out some guys. I think Stephen Glass was probably there too, the current coach of Memphis 901. No, he wasn't on the team then. Austin Deleuze, another really good player. FC Edmonton. This was our lone Canadian team that season after Montreal had left and Ottawa had joined the league but had not started playing yet. They had a really down year this year. Kyle Porter, one of their standout players, along with Michael Cox. Fort Lauderdale had been one of our best teams in year one. Still decent in year two, but had dropped off. Standout players, Mark Anderson, English player who had gone to Barry University, which is in Miami Shores, so local player. Fort Lauderdale had a lot of local players that year. Lionel Brown, a guy I worked with both in Fort Lauderdale and Miami FC. He, a local guy from Miramar. Nicholas Clavijo, who was the son of the great Fernando Clavijo, the late Fernando Clavijo. Abel Gabor, he was a local player. Ali Hassan, he was from Weston, local player, would go on to a really good career. Darnell King had gone to Florida Atlantic and was from Tampa, another local player. Hassan Ramos was from Miami, another local player. Several guys from South Florida on this team, which was important for attendance. Standout players, though, were Walter Restrepo, who led the league in assists that year, Lance Lang, and I would say Andy Herron also, who had been a star for the Costa Rican national team and in MLS. Fort Lauderdale not as good that season as they had been in the previous season, but they still made the playoffs. Minnesota, they get to the finals that year. Manny Lagos was their coach. Really, so many standout names on this team. We'll go through a couple of them. Miguel Ibarra. Neil Lavity. Ibarra was just fantastic at this level. Martin Nunez had moved over from Fort Lauderdale. Lucas Rodriguez, who scored a goal in the final at Al Lang that sent us to extra time in that match. Amani Walker. Puerto Rico Islanders, they were consistently competing in CONCACAF. They had beaten the LA Galaxy in 2010 in the CONCACAF Champions Cup over two legs. They had beaten Toronto FC over two legs the year before that. This season, they weren't quite as good. Noah Delgado's still there, obviously now the head coach of Oakland in USL. David Foley, Josh Hansen. Still some big names on that team, actually. Nicholas Adlery was still there as well. Okay, so they still had some of their really high-end... Jonathan Fania still there? Yeah, Fania was still there. So they had some of their really high-end core players. San Antonio, we've talked about this team. They had a lot of former MLS guys. Michael Hitchcock, a genius, a soccer genius, as those who follow NPSL, I'm sure know right now. Former president of FC Dallas. So there was an FC Dallas flavor to some of their signings. But in addition to those guys, they had guys like Pablo Campos, who was a standout at this level, and several others. Aaron Pitchcole, and he had played for FC Dallas. Josue Soto, who came from Houston Dynamo. Blake Wagner, who was from Florida, also from Tampa. He, although it lists him as Atlanta here, but he was from Tampa. He grew up in Tampa. Blake Wagner had played for FC Dallas as well. And, they were the best team in the regular. Ryan Cochran, another former MLS player, high-end MLS player. They were the best team in the regular season. And then we end with our champions, the Tampa Bay Rowdies, finally called the Rowdies, led by Ricky Hill, fantastic coach. Notice they had a smaller roster than everybody else. I didn't show the roster pages, but they had fewer players, yet they won the title because some of these guys were high end. Mike Ambersley, I think everybody who followed lower division soccer at the time knew how good he was. Dizzy Antoniak had moved over from FC Edmonton, key guy. Jeff Attinella, local guy, gone to University of South Florida, was from Clearwater. He was between the pipes. He was one of the best goalkeepers in the league. Stuart Campbell, their future coach, he was a key part of that team. Let's see. Shane Hill was the coach's son. Luke Mulholland, arguably the best player in the league in terms of upside. Fafa Pacalt, he wasn't so good there. You know, he then he's from Miami. He then kind of came home and played for Fort Lauderdale the next few years and was a standout and obviously has been in MLS since. Frankie Sanfilippo was the captain, really good player again too. And then there are two Japanese players. Yoshitaki moved toward the end of the season, but he had done his damage already in terms of success for Tampa Bay when he moved, and they got a transfer fee for him. Takuya Yama, just unbelievable professional, great professional. So this team wins the title, maybe a little bit surprisingly given their lack of depth, but their first 11 were as good as any first 11 in the league. And Ricky Hill did just a fantastic job with such a thin squad. And they did have injuries, and they sold Yoshitaki in the middle of the season, but they were able to keep it together and win the title. So that was the NASL in 2012. One significant note was this was the year that we had added the New York Cosmos to the league. We had announced that in the middle of 2012, in July of 2012, at an event in Soho, and they would join the league in 2013, the second half of 2013. So really big year, kind of NASL finding its feet, and I think really a lot of success with these clubs and with the league that year, which has set up Division II, lower division soccer, where USL is today. USL is in a position where they claim to be the heartbeat of American soccer. And I tend to agree with that. I think that's a marketing slogan, but that's also true. I mean, there's so much grassroots energy behind USL clubs that you don't necessarily see behind clubs in other leagues. I'll just leave it that put it that way. And I think a lot of that momentum started this season, 2012, in the NASL.